Hello, and welcome to Introducing Me. I'm your host, Sarah. I started this podcast to get to know other people and lifestyles while discovering more about myself. Each episode, I will give a new guest a chance to discuss their background, culture, interests, or whatever they want to talk about to help increase all of our own worldviews. Today, I'd like to introduce you to Michael Fosberg. He has an award-winning autobiographical story told in the form of a one-man play. It includes his journey to finding his biological father and Black heritage. I'm excited to have Michael here to talk more about his story and everything he's got going on in life. So thank you so much, Michael. Why don't you go ahead and tell the audience more about yourself?
Sure. Before I start though, before I tell about myself, you mentioned in your intro about doing these interviews to learn about new and different people so that you can learn about yourself. And at some point during our talk here today, I want to learn more about what you've learned about yourself by doing this over this process. But we can get to that later. Thanks for the invite to be here with you and to be with your listeners and to tell my story. And basically, each of us have a very large, big personal story. And I'm not going to start with, I was born poor child in the south of, no, I'm going to start with really the crux of the story that has been award winning for me and that I turned into a memoir and have turned into actually my career. I guess I would describe myself as a diversity, equity, and inclusion facilitator or trainer, although DE&I seems to be a poisonous word these days, or a poisonous phrase, I should say, and we can talk more about that later. Anyway, I didn't know who my biological father was for many, many years. My mother left my biological father when I was very young, and then she remarried, and I grew up with a stepfather. I was raised in a working class family in the northern suburbs of Chicago, which is where I live now in Chicago. And so I was raised by my biological mother, who was Armenian, and my stepfather, who was Swedish. And then they had a couple of kids, and we had a fairly normal. What is normal? Normal to everybody's different. We had a fairly normal upbringing, and then when I, fast forward to when I was in my early 30s, and I got a call one morning from my sister. So my parents had two children. I guess technically they would be called half siblings, half sister, half brother. But I grew up with them. They're my brother and my sister. Anyway, I got a call from my sister one morning informing me that our parents were getting a divorce. And I realized when she told me that I didn't know who my biological father was. I mean, I don't know why it didn't occur to me before then. I'd never talked to my mother really about my biological father. We had very little conversation about it growing up. Again, we left him when I was 2. She remarried when I was 5. So, there was this gap there, but then I had a dad and he was raising me and blah, blah, blah. And so when my sister said this to me, though, it really hit me that I realized I didn't know who my biological father was. And at the time I had a British girlfriend who lost her father when she was about 3 or 4 years old. She actually walked into a little workshop that he had in the back of their Tudor manor in London and found him electrocuted to death. She was 4 years old, and she had always felt this huge absence in her life because she didn't grow up with her father. And she said, you now have an opportunity to find out, who your father is. You probably have a lot of anger, and the anger is directed about not knowing who your biological father is. And it sort of made a lot of sense to me at that time. It was like, I was angry about the divorce. I didn't know how to make sense of it all. I didn't know anything about my biological father. And maybe that was this latent anger that was there that I never really explored. And so the British girlfriend, Jo, suggested that I call my mother and get some answers, ask her some questions. And so I called my mom, and she gave me a few bits of information. She told me his name was John Sidney Woods. And she told me that the last time she had spoken with him was some 30 years prior, and that she thinks he lived I don't know. She thought maybe in the Detroit area. She was very vague about it. So armed with those 3 bits of information, I was living in Santa Monica, California at the time, and I wasn't far from the beach, and I wasn't far from the library. And I went to the library, and libraries used to have this ancient device that we all used to use to find people. You're smiling. It was called a phone book. And so libraries actually had phone book sections. Many libraries would carry phone books from cities all around the country. And so I went to the library hoping they would have a Detroit phone book, which they did. And I went to the Detroit phone book. I looked up his name, John Sidney Woods, and there were about 5 listings, John Woods. And so I copied them all down. I raced home. At the time I was living in an apartment that was about the size of a walk-in refrigerator. It was so tiny. It was ridiculous. And I was so like, I didn't know what to do. I had these, 5 or 6 names on a list. I didn't know if any of them would be the person. I had no idea. I started thinking like, well, what could I ask if I called someone? Of course I'm going to ask, I'm looking for John Sidney Woods, but then, how many guys could have that name? I didn't know. And so I laid out this plot to sort of ask a series of questions. If the first one was right, and I picked up the phone finally, and I dialed the first name on the list, and a guy answers the phone. And right there, I was like, "Oh my God!" Like panicked. I don't know what to do. And I sort of choked. I said, "I'm looking for a John Sidney Woods." And he said, "You're speaking with him." And I was like, "Okay, it can't be that simple. It can't be that easy." I said, "Did you live in the Boston area in 1957? Because that's where I was conceived and where I lived with them. My mom had gone to college at Boston University. She met this guy. She got pregnant. And so I said, "Did you live in the Boston area in 1957? And he kind of took this pause. And I was like, it felt like it was a year, a pause for a year. And he said, "Yes, I did." And then I was like, "Oh my God." And I said, "Were you married to an Armenian woman by the name of Adrian Pilibosian?" That's my mother's maiden Armenian name. And he paused again, which again seemed like it was an eternity. And he said, "Yes, I was." And I mean, I realized I had just tracked my dad down in a first phone call. And I was so shocked and nervous and anxious and scared and elated and all of this mixed together. It was just like pouring out of me. And I just blurted out, "My name is Michael Fosberg and I'm your son." And then as I got that out, I suddenly had this realization of like, I guess I had heard stories about kids who had gone out and found their parents after many years, and the parent didn't want to have anything to do with them. And I was worried that might be the case. And so I blurted out, "It's okay if you don't want to talk to me. I just called to find out how you're doing and let you know I was doing all right." And he said, "No, my God, son, how are you?" And when he said the word son, I completely melted. Tears. I mean, I was just gone. And I said, "I'm fine. I'm good. I live in Los Angeles, not far from the beach." And he said, "And how's your mother?" I was like, "Yeah, she's fine, I guess. She just got a divorce. We're not on great terms." He goes, "Well, just remember, she's the only mother you've got." And I was like, "Oh my God, this is too." And so, like, now we're trying to wrap our heads around, you're my dad, I'm your son. I haven't spoken with you or seen you in 30 years. What do I say? What do we say to one another? We're sort of stumbling through this conversation gradually. And then out of the blue, he kind of says to me, "Son, there's a couple of things you should know. I'm sure your mother's never told you." And I was like, "Oh, okay. Well, aside from not telling me about you, I mean, what else could there be?" And he said, "Well, first of all, I want you to know that no matter what you were told or what you thought happened, I've always loved you and I've thought about you a lot." And again, it was like he had just said the word son to me again. It just hit me so, so deeply. And then he said, there's one other thing I'm sure your mother's never told you. And I said, what? And he said, I'm African American. And again, I was in this tiny room. It's the size of a walk-in refrigerator. There was a mirror on one side of the room, a full-length mirror on one side of the room for me. And I kind of caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. Like, did I just change? Like, I was like looking at myself like differently suddenly. And then he's just like sort of proceeded into telling me about my family. Like, my grandparents were still alive. They live in Virginia Beach, Virginia. He said, your great-great-grandfather was a member of the 54th Regiment in the Colored Infantry Unit in the Civil War. Your grandmother's father was an all-star pitcher in the Negro Leagues. He pitched for the St. Louis Stars. Your grandfather is a genius, and the science and engineering departments at Norfolk State University is named after him. And your grandparents are still alive, and they live in Virginia Beach, Virginia. And I was just like, I was first of all, I was like, can we get back to the black part? Because I'm still trying to wrap my head around the black part. And now you're just telling me, like, I got a history that dates back to slavery. It was overwhelming. It was incredible. And we talked some more, and we swore that we would stay in touch, and we exchanged numbers and stuff. And we got off the phone, and that's how I reconnected with my father for the first time in 30 some years. And then subsequently following that, like 2 weeks later, I got a phone call at 6 a.m, and it was my grandmother calling to wake me up. She was on the East Coast in Virginia Beach. I was in LA, and it was just this beautiful Southern black drawl that she was just a wonderful, beautiful, loving human being. And we just talked for a while, and it was just, I was incredible. And then a week after that, I get a little care package in the mail, and it had photographs of me as a baby, her holding me as a baby, this black woman holding this sort of white looking guy, baby, in her arms, and just so proud, pleased as punch. And then there was a little tissue wrapped object in that box. And when I unwrapped the tissue, it was my baby shoe. And she had kept my baby shoes all these years, and she kept one on her bedside table, and she sent the other one to me. And that's how I met my grandmother for the first time. And then the story goes on and on, obviously, to today. And what happened at how this all, so that story alone is like crazy, nutso, whatever. And I've always been, I've been in the acting field and the writing field my entire life. I've been an actor and a writer and a director and a teacher. And I started to write what I thought would be a memoir, which eventually became a memoir. And some folks asked me to read it. Actually, my sister asked me to read it aloud, some chapters from it, for a group of people one night. And we all got together, about 60 people there, and I read about 5 or 6 stories, and people were laughing and they were crying, and they came up to me and they said, "Oh my God, this is amazing. You should be doing this." And I said, "Yeah, I'm writing the book." And they said, No, you should be performing it." Now, again, my background was in acting and stuff, but I never thought about doing a one-person show. It just wasn't on my radar. I knew a lot of people who did that, but that just wasn't my thing. And I slowly got pulled into doing that. And when we first mounted the play, actually it was just after 9/11, 2001. Right then, we performed the play, we opened it, and it just caught fire, and it just took off. And what happened was the play elicited audiences to have conversations about race, about how we see ourselves and how we look at other people. I mean, that wasn't on my radar. I mean, I was just telling my story, and it has all these elements of black and white and culture and all this different stuff, but it just resonated so profoundly. And then I became aware of as I said earlier, the DE&I space. And I just started booking it in places at high schools and colleges. And then I moved to corporations and government agencies and military bases and law firms. And I've just, travel all over the place doing the show, the 45-minute play. I've condensed it down, and then facilitating a conversation and giving people tools to have more meaningful conversations about race and identity. So, uh, in a nutshell, that's my story.
Yes. Well, you got very lucky on it being the first phone call. That's
Right?
you only had that, I think you said 5, so 20% chance. Um,
There you go.
and for it to, have been a positive experience when, all of the emotions and everything that was going on. I know you said, you want to learn about me, what I've learned. We can talk about that, after we stop recording, because this recording's about you today.
Yes, I am.
But I'm curious if you're willing to share, since things took a positive way with your biological father, extended family even as well, what your mom's reaction was to all of this, because at the same time, she was also going through a divorce.
Yeah, well, she had, before I took the journey, she had gone through the divorce, and so she was, I guess it was maybe really another year before I actually went on the journey to go off and find my father. So that it was sort of in the in the rear view mirror, so to speak, as one might say. And but that being said, of course, when I told her I was going to go and search for my father, she was like incredibly nervous. Again, so remember, so I got information about from her name, city, etc., and then said, I'm going to go out and search for my father. Now, she knew my father was Black. She knew she hadn't told me that he was Black. She wasn't ready to tell me that, even though I said I was going to go and search for him. So she was still carrying a great deal of shame and embarrassment. And so she was very, very apprehensive and anxious about me saying I was going to go and search for him. And then when I found him, so I found him and I discovered all the secret came out, and suddenly I had a lot of anger towards my mother because I felt very betrayed that she had not told me this. I mean, she had opportunities, so many opportunities. Even, when I called her and said, I'm going to go search for my father, she had an opportunity then to tell me. But she didn't. And so I felt really betrayed, and I didn't know what to say to her. And I was so angry, and I was, talking to friends about it, and friends were like, I don't know, maybe you should yell at her. I don't know. There was all kinds of ideas coming up. And then one friend called me literally moments before I was going to pick up the phone to call her. And I told him the story. And the first thing he said to me was like, I always knew you were Black. And I was like, how did you know that? Like, what, and where would you get that from? And anyway, he says, I don't know. It just always seemed that way to me. And then I told him, I didn't know what to do about my mother. And he said, no. Don't you see you have an opportunity to absolve your mother of the shame that she's held all these years? She was given this shame by her parents, who were Armenian immigrants who came over this country from a war-torn Armenia. And now you had an opportunity, and she was shame and guilt that she had. And now you have an opportunity to absolve her of the shame and guilt, to forgive her. And so it's actually one of the tools that I impart on audiences. It's the 7th tool that I suggest, and it's practice forgiveness. It's the most difficult work you will ever do, but also the most rewarding.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. Forgiveness is not, something to come easy. And
No.
the timing was great for, your friend to have made that call at that moment.
Yes.
So then what has it been like, meeting extended family, in your 30s and learning about the culture of being half Black?
Well, it's so it's kind of interesting because I was raised obviously in a white working class family, and but that being said, my mother raised us to accept people, all people, based on the content of their character, not the color of their skin. And I don't want the listeners to think like we were practicing some form of color blindness. That was not what my mother was advocating for. Color blindness, I often hear people use that term, and I know that they're well-meaning when they say that. But what it means is that you are in denial of what's in front of you. And I mean, Frank, I can see the color of your shirt. Why wouldn't I be able to see the color of your skin? And so why do we do so? Anyway, she brought us up to respect people for the content of their character. And I actually was another lucky thing. You mentioned luck before. I grew up in a community that was extremely diverse, in a high school that was unbelievably diverse. I would say it was probably 1/3 Black, 1/3 white, and 1/3 Hispanic, which is very, very unusual. And I was very lucky in that way. And so I grew up with that diversity around me. So I had that as a background, but then walking into an actual Black family, of which I had no experience with, a family experience with, so to speak. It was just, for me, it was really wonderful because my family was really they were just so loving, and they were just so embracing. I mean, it was just like a big bear hug. They were like, come on in, baby, you want us. And they accepted me, and they, made fun of me a little bit, I remember going to a family reunion, and they were sort of like, bring Michael over here. Let's get Michael some chitlins. Come on, Michael, come over here and have some chitlins, and they're just kind of making fun of that. And because they assumed, which was true, I'd never had chitlins before. And it was just great. I mean, it was just really wonderful. Now, of course, my experience is still very different from someone who had grown up in a Black family, in a Black community. But it's been a wonderful experience to be able to get to know my family. And I guess I would say, and this is this is something that I've learned that has been a very big part of the work that I do. And I'm going to guess that this is something that you have learned from doing these interviews. I'm guessing already. We have more in common than we have different. And I think if you talk to people and you get to know them, that's what you discover. And yet in our country today, it doesn't seem that way. It seems like everybody's at everybody's throats, or everybody is, you're either on the right or the left or whatever, when in fact we do have more in common than we have different. It's a fact. It's known in academic circles as intergroup contact theory. And it's a proven theory that by sharing our personal stories across majority and minority populations, we can break down the prejudices that exist between us by discovering we have more in common than we have different.
Yeah, no, that's definitely an accurate statement. To hear that it's been proven in academia is also great to hear. When you start to hear people's stories, you do have that chance to realize there's connections. Now, when you started your story, originally intending to make it be a memoir, and then getting the advice, do this as a show, be performing on this, you were just telling your story. So what was it like to be putting your story out there when, it wasn't necessarily like a straightforward thing? You had these twists and turns, you had these moments of like not knowing, was it going to be positive? Was it going to be negative? So what were those first, performances like to then see such success?
Well, I had a precursor to that. As I mentioned, I was asked to read a few stories for a group of people. And that was when I saw the reaction from that night of this group of, and again, it was only 60 people, but still when I received the reaction from the people that night, it was just really, really, really overwhelming. It was like, wow, okay, I'm just telling my story. You guys are, and they were like, you got to do this. You got to do this. And then I actually did another reading a couple of months later of some different stories that were also would become a part of the book. And I got the same response. And so I knew that it had a lot of power behind it, a lot of resonance with people. I wasn't actually yet aware of intergroup contact theory at that time. It wasn't until a couple of years into touring that I discovered that theory and read a lot about it. It's a theory by a sociologist by the name of Gordon Allport, who was a sociologist at Harvard, who developed and wrote a book, The Nature of Prejudice, in 1954. But anyway, when I first mounted it in a theater, when I first put it on stage, I was really, I don't know, I'm scared as hell. But I think I wasn't nervous about the stories as much as I was just like, I'd never been on stage by myself before. I mean, sure, in a play, maybe, you had a moment where you're on stage and you have a couple of lines and then another character walks on stage, but I was never on stage for 2 hours by myself telling my own personal story. And so it was really, I was a mess. I was an absolute mess. I remember this kind of funny story. So I had the original director was a black director who I'd become good friends with. And we had a really great time putting it together. And he brought a lot of really great insight to the piece and to the work. And there used to be an intermission in the play. And then, of course, when I condensed it to 45 minutes, didn't need that. But the intermission happened right after the moment when I discover I'm black, and I raise my fist and dance to some James Brown music, the James Brown "I'm Black, I'm Proud," and I dance, and the lights go out, and I go out backstage, and then we have a second an intermission, and then we do a second act. Well, during the intermission of opening night, the director came backstage and he said, "Let's blow the audience away. What if I go on for the second act?" He's a black guy. And he said, "What if I went on for the second act?" I thought, oh man, that would just really blow their minds. And that really helped lighten the mood for me in the second act. I was a little less anxious, but the response that night and each night subsequently from that was just amazing. And I mean, we had people from like People magazine reached out, and the New York Times reached out, and all kinds of people reached out to inquire about the play and everything. And so it was really a pretty phenomenal. The reviews came out and I couldn't have paid the critics to write better reviews. It was just, a phenomenal experience. And each night, again, I wasn't yet doing talkbacks. It wasn't until I moved the show to Missouri. I did a show at the Kansas City Repertory Theater in 2002, and we did some talkbacks afterwards. And that's also where I really got keyed into how powerfully the play impacted people in terms of resonating with their own personal lives. Like they didn't necessarily go and find out that they were half black or they were biracial, but everybody goes on a journey of self. Everybody's going on a journey to find out who they are, how they fit in. And so that really resonated powerfully for people.
So then you've since, you've been taking it around, you've been doing your story in front of tons of people, having these talkbacks, hearing what other people are saying. What else have you had the chance to do with your work and like your mission in this DEI space?
Yeah. It's funny. People ask me sometimes, "Are you still acting?" I'm like, I don't have time to do plays anymore. I haven't done a play in years. I mean, other than my play. And I'm fine with that. I love what I do. I love doing the show. I mean, people say, "Well, you've done it hundreds of times. Aren't you bored with it?" When you think about someone who's been on Broadway doing The Lion King for 10 years or whatever, they've done a lot more shows than I've done. I guarantee you. So, and for me, again, getting to that talk back afterwards and really engaging people and giving them some real concrete, actionable takeaways, tools that they can use, and hearing people tell their stories and seeing people cry or laugh while they're sharing their stories afterwards is just so beautiful. But in addition to doing it, I've also I published 2 books. The memoir I published in 2011, which is called Incognito: An American Odyssey of Race and Self-Discovery. It's available at the website incognitotheplay.com. And then the second book I published in 2020, right after the George Floyd murder. It's called Nobody Wants to Talk About It: Race, Identity, and the Difficulties in Forging Meaningful Conversations. And the second book is really about my years traveling around the country, telling my story and engaging people in conversations, and all of the crazy things that I've learned and heard over those years. And it really breaks down the tools and lays out the tools for the reader. And so that's that book got published in 2020, also available on the website. I did an e-learning platform. I put together an e-learning platform because a lot of companies, corporations, don't have time to send all their employees to see a live presentation, and they do diversity training online. And I'd heard so many horror stories about people like, yeah, I got to do this diversity training thing online. It's a stupid questionnaire. It's so dumb. And I thought, well, what if I took my play and made that into a diversity training tool online? And so we did that, and it's like a 6-part thing. And I'd give speeches, and I also have a podcast, which has been really great as well. I imagine you're obviously really enjoying what you're doing with this. The podcast is called Authenticity, Belonging, Community, where we explore the ABCs of inclusivity. And I interview people from all different fields to try to find out how they go about creating an inclusive workplace or community. Because everybody does that. Everybody, whether you're a school teacher or a restaurateur or a lawyer or a military person or a musician or a director, everybody has to work with people. And how do you get people to feel like they belong, like they're included in the work? And so that's what we explore in the podcast.
Great. So you're doing lots of good work, different mediums, different ways for people, to connect, learn more. What is kind of your main mission or main goal that you want people to understand?
I think what I said earlier about we have more in common than we have more in common than different. I think that's I think that is the greatest challenge of our time right now. I mean, so it's not my job when I go places to talk about politics. That's what I do is a human issue. I actually sometimes have gotten pushback from people in the room saying, this is very divisive or this is very political. And I'll say to them, no, this is an HR issue. This is a human relations issue. It has nothing to do with politics. By you saying that, you're making it political. Take a moment and see, how do you go about seeing who you are and how do you look at other people? It's a human issue. And again, the fact of the matter is we have more in common than different. And so I'm trying to ameliorate the divisiveness that we have in this country right now by going out and sharing and spreading that message and trying to bring people together, cross race, cross ethnicity, cross political ideology. Look, it's probably very obvious. I don't know, maybe it's not. I'm probably a flaming liberal, but I probably have a lot in common with a Trump supporter. I know that, like, maybe people might think that's crazy, but we all need, and we all have similar needs and wants and desires, and we're not really talking about those things. We're more interested in making everything about political or politics. Well, let's talk about, how do we make our cities safe, and how do we provide for people, and how do we care for people, and how do we bring compassion to people, and how do we feel cared for, and all of those things. So again, you asked me a simple question. It's not a simple answer, but it is a simple answer. We have more in common than we have different.
Yes. Yeah. No, I think it's important to hear. And, because you're willing and vulnerable to share your story across so many audiences, and you've done so much to, reach people in different ways. Like it's good to hone in on, like, what is that one thing that is so important. Now, you've mentioned how you kind of have these actionable items that people can take. Are you willing to share some of those actions today?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's 7 tools that I use, and then there's a 7 tools. There's a bunch of do's and don'ts and all that kind of stuff. I've got a lot of stuff that I want to give people. I want people to walk away from it not just going, "Wow, that was an amazing story." I want them to also have something that they can go, "Hey, I can practice this. I can use this, not just at work, but in my life." The first tool is tell your story. It seems pretty obvious, but it's true. Tell your story. That's where we find our commonalities. The second tool is don't judge the differences. Flip the script. Differences, we're hardwired to see the differences, and we're also unconscious of how those differences affect us. We allow those differences to create a wall. So instead of judging the differences, start by finding a commonality and then embrace the differences. After all, if we were all the same, we'd be bored. We would be bored. We all want to have the, I don't know, the coolest glasses or the neatest shoes or the latest thing or whatever. And yet at the same time, we all kind of want to fit in. And so again, embrace the differences. What's the third one? I think it's we need to recognize that there isn't one way to have a conversation about race and identity. If there was one way to do it, we'd all be doing it. That would make it a lot easier, right? But there's not, because we each have a different journey with identity. And because we have a different journey, when we come to the table to talk about that, it gets very messy. And so since it gets messy, we need to remember to get comfortable being uncomfortable. I know I say that and I look across the room and people look at me cross-eyed like, why would I want to get comfortable being uncomfortable? That is absurd. Except that the truth of the matter is that each of us every day probably experiences an uncomfortable moment and we work through it. So we could do that with this conversation as well. I think number 5 is we can disagree so long as we're not disagreeable, which, as I mentioned earlier, I think is one of our major problems today. Once you become disagreeable with someone, conversation stops. That's it. It's over. So we can agree to disagree so long as we don't become disagreeable. Number 6, I think, is we need to recognize that just because we may not have experienced racism or sexism or homophobia or disability indifference or some other form of discriminatory treatment doesn't mean that those aren't realities for other people. We need to listen with empathy. And then the final tool, as I mentioned earlier, is practice forgiveness, which is a very difficult thing to do. Just because we forgive someone doesn't necessarily mean we condone their behavior. But if you walk around with resentment, that is just going to weigh you down. So you've got to find a way to forgive.
Right. Well, I appreciate, you sharing those actionable items, that might not all necessarily be easy, but important, in making connections, and just seeing things be better. So what is the plan for you for the future? Are you going to keep, doing what you're doing, kind of keep doing your show, like doing only acting with your one act? Like what is the hope for the future for you?
Well, this is complicated. I don't know why it's so complicated. Well, I've been doing this for a long time, for over 20 years, and I am approaching the age of 67. And as much as I love what I do, my field is actually contracting. For listeners who don't know, some may know, the field of diversity, equity, and inclusion, the concept of critical race theory, anti-woke bills, all these things are happening all across the country. And so, for instance, in the state of Texas or Florida or Tennessee or Arkansas or Missouri or Wisconsin or Utah, and there's a couple of others, I can no longer do what I do at state colleges and universities and high schools. It's been banned. Let that sit in for a minute. Yeah, it's crazy. And you heard my story. Am I making people feel uncomfortable? I don't think so. I'm just telling my story. So anyway, it's been misunderstood. It's been twisted and whatnot. And the space or the field is contracting, and work is becoming a little more difficult to come by. I hope to continue to do what I'm doing for at least another year, but the plan is actually to move to Portugal.
Why Portugal?
I feel like I just threw you a curveball.
That wasn't what I was expecting when you said you were about to move.
I know you didn't expect it at all, did you? You're like, your head went, what? Well, my wife and I have always dreamed of living in Europe. It's we've visited many European countries and we really enjoy it. My brother lives in Spain. We've been going to Portugal for a number of years, and we kind of fell in love with the country. It's very inexpensive. They have universal health care. There are no guns. And there are a lot of people who speak English, actually. There's lots of people who speak English there, and it's a beautiful country. And we just arrived on Portugal. So in about a year and a half, we're going to move.
So will you become like dual citizens? It's different in every country. So
My wife has dual citizenship. So because I'm married to her, I'm coming along for the ride.
that's the way to do it.
Yes.
Well, that's very exciting. You can always, keep things in your back pocket, as things change in the world, you got to kind of see what happens, but also as nearing retirement age, being somewhere where there's universal healthcare is not a bad thing to do.
Exactly. That's the way I feel about it. Someone asked me, I was at a company in Washington, D.C. Yesterday, doing some work, doing the show for them and doing a dialogue. And I know the woman who's the diversity director there. I've known her for a number of years. And I was sharing with her because we'd been planning this for months leading up to it. And I said, just before the presentation, I'm going to be out of the country for a couple of weeks. She goes, oh, okay. Well, just make sure you get back. And I was like, yeah. And so when I saw her yesterday and we were talking, she goes, where did you go? And I told her what I just told you. We're going to move to Portugal. And she goes, like, are you going to stop doing what you're doing? And I was like, well, I guess so. She goes, well, what if you get calls? And I said, well, I guess I would come back and do it if someone called me, but I really feel like, I'm getting towards retirement and I want to move, I guess. And she was like, okay, I get it. So.
Yes. Well, it's an exciting time for sure.
Yes.
Now, before I start to wrap things up, is there anything else you would like to share with the listener today?
I think I've said a lot. If people are interested in finding out more about it, they can go to the website. Again, the website is Incognito the Play, all one word, incognitotheplay.com. And you can find video there and you can purchase books there if you're interested. You can learn about the tools are listed on there. There's all kinds of information on there. If you're interested in learning more about booking, you can contact me there. I'm easy to find. The podcast is on there as well. It's posted on the website as well as, all the podcast platforms. So yeah.
Right. Well, I will of course make sure to leave your website in the description. Now, at the end of all my episodes, I do ask my guests a random question that doesn't have to do with what we've been talking about. So my question for you today is, who is your hero?
Oh boy. Okay. Well, I'm sure you've asked that of other guests. That's a complicated question for me because I have a couple, but I guess I'm going to lay out one. So when I met my African-American grandfather, Roy Woods, he's just like, I didn't spend, maybe I spent 10 years with him before he passed away. But he was just this solid human being who had lived this incredibly full life as a Black man in America, going through all of the changes that happened. And also, I should mention, he was a light-skinned African American, which in the Black community also has a little bit of resentment, light skin, dark skin, because there's this thing about passing and all of that within the Black community. But he was a super well accomplished. Again, the science building at Norfolk State University is named after him. And he was mostly a quiet individual. And one day, my aunt, that would be my grandmother's sister, told me, she remarked to me, she said, "Your grandfather absolutely adores you." And I was like, "Well, that's interesting because he's kind of quiet, you know." And she goes, "He talks more to you than I've seen him talk to 100 people in the last year." And I realized how, like, I had brought something to his life at the end of his life and how beautiful that was. And him being such a pillar in his community. And for me, that I just think of him when I think of a hero. He did so many wonderful things, and I can only hope to be half the man that he was.
All right, that brings this episode to a close. Of course, as I mentioned, I'll be leaving Michael's website in the description. You know, he shared all of the great things that can bring you to, you know, with his play, with his books, podcast, all of the good things. So feel free to go check that out and connect more with Michael. If you would like to connect with the podcast, our website is also in the description. That brings you to all of our past episodes, past resources, and social media. It brings you to our social media. We are on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. So if you want to go follow those pages, that support is always appreciated. If you'd like to support the podcast monetarily, there is a link to do that as well. And if you would like to share your story on the podcast, my email is in the description. That is always the best way to reach me. So thank you so much, Michael, for spending time with me today, and to my listeners for taking the time out of your day to hear a new story. Until next time, bye.
Bye, Sarah. Thank you so much.